Good morning, everybody. Uncertainty is the only certainty we're facing as we look at real estate here today and try and set some new priorities for the years ahead. If you haven't taken into account what Daniel has shared with us today, you ought to, because it will fundamentally change the way we think about our industry and particularly in relation to the office, in a sense. That if you look at it, the fundamental relationship between people and place has changed over the last couple of years. And that has a net impact on how people use and consume, certainly the office. And I think it plays out across all asset classes. So let me do a little experiment. Going out and talking to a lot of people over the last few years, I'm quite interested in the composition of the office. So show of hands, who here belongs to the property investment, the development, the property company world, the supplier of the built environment? Let's have a show of hands. Okay, so who here represents the consumer, the people who pay the rents, the tenants? Small number. Who here represents the world of policy making? Yeah, you'll fudge that one. Does that tell us something about how introspective, by and large, this industry is? In many cases, we are the world's largest talking shop, and we need to spread our wings and engage on a much wider basis and understand who our ultimate consumer is. The investor has always viewed real estate as a safe bet, covenant risk, and all those other risks were things you worried about. You need to be worried about it, because with disruptive industries such as this hitting enterprise, and we haven't even begun to talk about the impact of AI and the metaverse. But in terms of the systems we operate, CMS is a legal practice. What are you guys thinking about the impact of blockchain technology around implementing transactions, whatever? So the theme for today is new priorities. My first thought is we've got to move away from binary thinking. And we've got to start asking ourselves why on a much more regular basis. Because, ladies and gentlemen, our world, our beloved industry, is going through an enormous paradigm shift. And people have been arguing about this. You mentioned about the death of the office. The office is not dead, but the system underpinning it needs a damn good overhaul. And it's quite interesting to look at the range of speakers following us this morning in terms of the journalist and how they introduced their Bartleby column in 2018 to look about work and how managers manage work. And you look at their recent columns about, it's all about the place bit. Or if it's here from Martin, who's going to talk about the charity sector and about the fact that there's a crying shame that so many kids have to hop on a bus tonight because they've nowhere else to sleep. So I think this paradigm shift is going to be a whole raft of mini shifts. Analog to digital, we saw at the BBC in terms of we had to change because we moved from single channel world to multi-channel to 24-hour news cycles. I think we're going to fundamentally have to think about asset to service. We're going to have to get out of our silos and think about systems. We're going to have to think about portfolios to platforms, probably ownership to subscription, and clearly standardization to customization. So it'll be interesting to see what the BCO thinks about that. But most of all, consumers are going to want a situation where an industry can look at providing not static solutions, but on demand and subscribed. And I think also there's going to be a massive shift of what I call from ego to eco. And decarbonization, I think, is going to be the order of the day. So we are moving into a completely multi-dimensional world, which for building owners, investors, whatever, is going to be a very difficult nut to crack. But the trends are there already. In terms of hybrid is not going away. It's going to be copper fastened in the demand profile for most organizations around the world. So that nature of demand is fundamentally changed. And regardless of the anxious calls by many CEOs to say, let's get everyone back to the office, people are simply not doing that. So how do you manage a facility for 3 days a week? We're really starting to think now about using technology, taking a leaf out of Daniel's book and going to a very different world where we think about platforms rather than portfolios. The whole risk factor has fundamentally changed. Who's to say there's not going to be another pandemic? I do some work as a board member in the NHS, and I can tell you now the COVID dilemma hasn't gone away, and there's a complete surge taking place in the last couple of weeks. What's that got to do with the duty of care of a landlord in terms of the buildings, particularly most of them being sealed buildings and air circulation and the like? So that's a dilemma. From an employer, from a C-suite perspective, it's how do I become an employer of choice, given what we heard earlier about the nature of the labour market in this country. And it's the same in many other countries around the world. We talked about CSR for years. We've done a lot of greenwashing and lip service. ESG is here to stay, and ignore it and your pearl. So lots and lots happen. But one of the things I would love you to start thinking about is how everything connects to everything else. Return to the office 100% is just simply not going to happen. So therefore, we have to look at all the factors that make up what sort of our world is changing towards. And I describe it as not only has the game changed, ladies and gentlemen, but the entire stadium. And that's why we have to take a long, hard look at our 100-year-old blueprint of how we do things, and take it not at a market level, but at a systemic level, and understand that there's a huge adjustment of place having taken place virtually over the last 2 years. The big difference is we're all accustomed to dealing with market shifts up and down on geography. The shift in demand has taken place globally, and it's not going back anywhere else. And that's built a huge amount of momentum, not just in enterprise and tenants who sign leases, but in their workers. And that correlation between the worker demand for how they want to work, which has never been the place before. The employee-employer balance of power has shifted irrevocably, and it's not changing back anytime soon, which feeds into demand. But the elephant in the room, ladies and gentlemen, is not demand, it's revenue streams from existing portfolios. If you look at some of the banks are thinking of cutting 50% of their portfolio in the next 3 to 5 years. So that means the industry has got to roll up its sleeves and start to innovate like it never has before, and think about getting sustainability at the heart of everything we do. And we have to move away from our fixed mindsets and be much more fluid in our thinking. That gives rise to a whole raft of fear and vulnerability. Let's call it as it is. But there are huge opportunities there. And rather than being negative, I can see a remarkable renaissance coming if we put our minds to it and we're willing to move into it through 21st our mode. So we have to think multidimensional. This is no longer about the deal, the transaction, the portfolio. I describe it as something called omni-working, working any place, anywhere, anytime. And it's not about more flex. We were talking earlier about how Land Securities and other organizations have employed space as a service, and JLL forecast the market would be up to 30% of flex. I think it'll be 50 or 60%, if not more. But the parameters we're thinking about are binary, because what's emerging, and Daniel will, I'm sure, agree with this, is a whole new dimension of working coming out, which I describe as fluid, which is all about the impact of AI, the impact of machine learning, and last but not least, this whole new, unexplored, ununderstandable world, the metaverse. Witness what Accenture have done over the last few months in terms of putting all their graduates through their induction in an Accenture metaverse. The mind boggles, ladies and gentlemen. So we need to think about this in terms of 4 lenses, not just place, but people, technology, and leadership. And underpinning all of that is a real consideration to the stakeholder, the missing stakeholder in the room, that is Mother Earth and planet. Because we can't, as an industry which pumps out 40% of greenhouse gases and all the carbon, has the time arrived, ladies and gentlemen, to say that we hit peak office? We don't need any more of them. Need we to be making better efforts to make smarter, more sustainable use of what we have, rather than burn more carbon? Is there a new role for bricks and mortar? So I think we've got to move our focus from beyond the physical. I think that's an anathema to a lot of people. I certainly took a long time to get my head around it. I think we have to think about a move from a capital to income model. There's no playbooks out there. You can't get McKinsey in to tell you what to do. So you're going to have to experiment and try things out and have the courage and strength of your convictions to try out different models. And I think most of all, we need to follow the 3 A's. We need to have a long, hard look at ourselves and we need to acknowledge that, in the context of offices, but I think of all of real estate, it's not dead, never will be. But we need to take the first step in the process of acknowledging that the system needs to be adjusted. We need to adopt our ways of thinking. We're all trained to generate huge value on the assumption that the consumer is always going to be there to pay rent. Those days are over. And we have to do and adjust our way of doing things, understand things like blockchain technology, AI, and a whole raft of other things. We need to get much more diversity into our industry, and we need to collaborate across boundaries. And I would leave you with one thought. Salek was the inventor of the polio vaccine, and I think his simple quote is, "We, ladies and gentlemen, are stewards of the built environment. We've all made a nice living. Some have made huge profits out of this. We've now got to start thinking very differently, because if we don't do that, people like Daniel and other disruptors will come in and offer a different model." So I would urge people, as you set new priorities today, to go beyond traditional thinking and to seek fresh perspectives. Remember, uncertainty is the new uncertainty, the new certainty, should I say. But we need to adopt creative adaptability to move forward. Thank you very much.